Scary horror stories are usually associated with horror movies and urban legends, meant to send chills down our spines. But there are some truly paranormal stories and true crime stories that defy belief due to the bizarre and otherworldly nature, and they may forever remain unexplained. Number 5. In La Parva, a popular ski spot in the Chilean Andes, the locals tell a horror story that has existed for many years, involving a woman and her young son, who plan to spend some time skiing on the slopes when tragedy strikes. The story takes place during peak ski season, when the woman named Lola and her son set out in the morning for some fun in the snow. At some point during the day, a thick fog starts to rise up from the valley below, which is often a forewarning of an incoming storm. As the mother and son start to make their way down the slopes, the fog grows even thicker and eventually envelops them, causing them to lose sight of each other. Lola starts to panic when she can no longer hear her son, and she starts frantically yelling his name and running blindly into the thick fog in an attempt to locate him. Thanks to the low visibility, she slips and starts sliding through the snow towards a narrow, rocky gully where she loses consciousness. A lift operator that is passing by on the way to his cabin notices Lola lying in the snow, and at first he's convinced that she has passed away, but upon closer inspection, he realizes that she is still breathing. He notices that she has suffered a few cuts from the fall, and when he manages to wake her, she only mutters a single word, her son's name. The operator then manages to carry her back to his cabin, where he dresses her cuts and immediately leaves to find a doctor. He and the doctor make their way back, and when they arrive, Lola is nowhere to be found, and neither she nor her son is ever seen or heard from again. However, locals have reported that on some days, she can be heard wailing and yelling her son's name near to the lift operator's cabin, even though she's nowhere to be seen. Number 4. Ira Einhorn attended the first Earth Day event in Philadelphia, where he was a speaker, and later, he claimed that he played an instrumental part in the creation and organization of the event, though this has been disputed by other event organizers. He also served as an English instructor at the Temple University in Philadelphia in 1964 and 65, though his contract wasn't renewed after he made it clear that he had contempt for the academic world. It also didn't help that he would often discuss the delights of illegal substances with his students. In 1972, Einhorn started a relationship with a woman named Holly. They spent 5 years together until 1977, when she decided to leave him, after which she moved to New York City. After Einhorn threatened to throw the belongings that she'd left in their apartment out into the street, she returned to Philadelphia to collect them. But she never returned to New York, and she was never seen again. When Philadelphia police questioned Einhorn about her disappearance, he told them that she had gone out to a nearby co-op to buy sprouts and tofu, but never returned. Doubts began to arise about his claims when his neighbors started to complain about a foul odor coming from his apartment. This caught the attention of the police, who searched the apartment 18 months later. They were shocked to find Holly deceased in a trunk that he had stored in his closet. A police officer remarked to Einhorn, "Looks like we found a Holly," to which he replied, "You found what you found." Barbara Bronfman, who he had met through a shared interest in the paranormal, posted 10% of his $40,000 bail, and he was released from prison. He then decided to flee to Europe, receiving further financial support from Barbara. In his absence, he was sentenced to life in prison for Holly's death, but he spent the next 17 years in Europe under the name of Eugene Malone. He did his best to avoid extradition to the US, but ultimately failed, and on the 20th of July, 2001, he was extradited. Einhorn decided to defend himself at trial, where he claimed that Holly's life was, in fact, ended by CIA agents who framed him because of his investigation into the Cold War and psychotronics. After a month-long trial, he was ultimately found guilty and once again sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3. When Stacy Castor met Jerry Daniels, the pair immediately hit it off and eventually got married. They would go on to have 2 daughters, Ashley and Bree, to whom both Stacy and Jerry were very close. But despite the bond that they had had with their children, the couple started to grow apart, and it was rumored that both were having affairs with other people. Near the end of 1999, Jerry's health started to deteriorate, seeming unsteady on his feet, coughing and feeling swollen. His family suggested that he see a doctor, but before he managed to do so, he passed away in early 2000. His passing was deemed to be from a heart attack, but his sister was skeptical, and she requested an autopsy to be done. Stacy, however, objected, stating that she believed the doctors to be correct, putting a halt to the request. 3 years later, she married David Castor, who ran an air conditioning installation and repair company, and she started working as his office manager. In August of 2005, she called the sheriff's office and told them that David had locked himself in their bedroom the previous day, after they'd had an argument. She stated that when he didn't show up for work, she tried to reach him on his cell phone, but he wasn't responding, and she was concerned as he was depressed. Sergeant Robert Willoughby from the sheriff's office went to the house and kicked the bedroom door down, where he discovered David deceased. Close to him, police found a bottle of antifreeze and a glass containing a bright green liquid. It was ruled that he had taken his own life by ingesting the antifreeze. But when the glass was dusted, Stacy's fingerprints were found. A turkey baster containing David's DNA was also found, and it was suspected that Stacy had waited until he'd become weak and then force-fed him the liquid. After a failed surveillance campaign against Stacy, detectives decided to exhume Wallace's body, and it was found that he also had traces of antifreeze in his system. As pressure mounted and her guilt became more apparent, she attempted to frame her own daughter, Ashley, for the crime by poisoning her and writing a fake suicide note in which Ashley confessed. The plan backfired, however, when Ashley made a full recovery and informed investigators that her mother had given her a nasty-tasting alcoholic drink, after which she has no memory. Several drafts of the note were found on Stacy's computer, and she was sentenced to serve more than 51 years in prison before being eligible for parole. Number 2. In its heyday, the Queen Mary was a transatlantic ocean liner, but in 1967, it was permanently docked in Long Beach, California, where it now serves as a hotel. One of the first employees to work on the ship since then is Marine Engineer John Smith, who had stated that over a 2-month period while working on the bow, he heard sounds that should not have been there. He describes them as the sound of metal being torn apart, the rushing of water, and men screaming for their lives, as if the hull had been breached and it was being flooded by the ocean. Every time he heard the sounds, he would rush to investigate, but never found anything out of place. It wasn't until a few years later that he read about an event that happened during World War II, after the Queen Mary had been converted into a troop ship. During this time, the ship accidentally collided with a British cruiser, ending the lives of over 300 men. It's believed that John was hearing the remnants of the tragedy. On another occasion, maintenance supervisor Kathy Love and a coworker heard strange sounds coming from the ship's pool area. They described it as the sound of a small girl giggling and splashing in the water. As they approached the pool to investigate, the splashing stopped, but the giggling continued, and they saw the wet footprints of a child walking towards the locker room. A former tour guide has also stated that when she was closing down the tour for the day, she noticed a man standing behind her. He was wearing dirty blue overalls, and when she moved out of the way for him to pass, he was no longer there. It's believed that this is the spirit of a man named John Petter, who lost his life when he was accidentally crushed by watertight doors during a routine fire drill. The ship has cemented its place in paranormal stories, being named one of the 10 most haunted places in America by Time magazine. Number 1. In 1975, Lynn Plaskett, a former councilwoman, was 24 years old, had recently separated from her husband, and was raising her 3-year-old son by herself. When she went for a routine physical checkup one day, she was told that she had carcinoma on her uterus, and that she would have needed to have a hysterectomy done. During an exam before the surgery, the doctor noticed a strange lump on the side of her neck, and he took a biopsy. He found that she no longer needed to have the surgery done, but that she was suffering from lymphoma, which was still very rare at the time. Unfortunately, the cancer had spread throughout her body, and he informed her that she would only have 3 more months to live. He allowed her to go home on the condition that she returned the next day. That afternoon, while she was sitting on her bed, she experienced a paranormal event. She stated that she heard a loud buzzing sound similar to electricity, and that the room seemed to be filling with a strange fog. She then felt herself being lifted off the bed and started levitating in the air. Strangely, she didn't feel scared at all, and suddenly she saw a small disc-shaped object with a raised top and multicolored lights enter the room through the window. It continued into the room and hovered over her, never touching her, but moving back and forth from her head to her feet as if it were examining her. A few minutes later, it turned and left the room. Immediately after, she rolled over and went to sleep, waking the next day feeling revived, and she knew that everything was going to be fine. The following day, she started a chemotherapy program in a last attempt to prolong her life, though her doctor told her that it wouldn't help much. Just 4 days later, a malignant tumor in her chest had all but disappeared, and 4 months later, she was in remission, eventually becoming cancer-free. Lynn is convinced that it was due to the celestial healing that was performed by the UFO that visited her in her room. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.